if you would just tell me your name and what is your church and what part of the state is your church in?
I'm Rachel Brown, and my church is Hamburg Presbyterian Church. That's 20 minutes south of Buffalo City proper.
Okay.
I'm Patricia Estel, and I'm at Clarence Presbyterian Church. Clarence is a suburb of Buffalo to the east.
I am Thomas Burian. I am the pastor at the Silver Creek and the Dunkirk Presbyterian Church that is southwest of Buffalo, halfway between Erie, Pennsylvania and Buffalo.
Okay.
I'm Betsy Cashing, and I am with Olean First Presbyterian Church, which is right on the Pennsylvania-New York border, about an hour and a half south of Buffalo. And I am the moderator-elect.
Congratulations.
Thank you.
I'm Cynthia Wickwire-Lundquist, and I'm retired, and I'm working with the Anti-Racism Task Group.
Okay.
I'm Linda Babcock. I'm 20 minutes south of Buffalo in Orchard Park, probably the whitest community represented here. Buffalo Bills play 5 minutes from the church, who now has a Black pastor. So I'm glad I'm part of the Anti-Racism Task Group.
I'm Rex Stewart, and I'm at Youngstown First Presbyterian Church, and Youngstown is right on the northernmost end of the Niagara River as it empties into Lake Ontario. So we can see Toronto across Lake Ontario from our yards.
I'm Kevin Schoner on the Kenmore Presbyterian Church, which is 1 block north of Buffalo. That's a tagline that Kenmore has used for, I'm not sure how many years. And we are in the process of selling the building and moving to a new location. So it's a very exciting time for us. It's given us a chance to refocus and re-energize the congregation. And we've been doing anti-racism seminars or whatever after church for the past several months now, a series of them, and it's been really it's been a great conversation starter. So it's really, I feel really positive about where we're headed.
Good. Okay, so is that everyone?
Jimmie, I wanted to introduce Melinda. I believe she's called in on the phone, so she's introduced herself through the chat.
Okay.
Melinda is the clerk of session of Grand Island, which is the island between Buffalo, New York and Niagara Falls, New York. So welcome, Melinda.
Thank you, everyone, for being here. So what I want to do is to, and again, I really meant it when I said I'm looking forward to coming in the fall, and I've never seen the falls, and understand that I'm a fan of the Buffalo Bills, and I understand you're getting a new stadium. So once that new stadium is constructed with a dome, I will hopefully come to a game.
No dome, sorry.
Don't hold your breath.
No dome. It's not. They still not doing a dome.
Nope.
Oh my
Not
Lord.
likely.
You got to have home field advantage.
Wouldn't be Buffalo if there wasn't a foot of snow coming down on a
Hey,
game.
look, Josh Allen has said he doesn't like playing in cold weather. All right, I'll leave it alone. So I'm going to share my screen, and I want to talk. A lot of my talk is about the work that we do in our offices, but I want to talk about it in as a way of thinking about resources that we offer, and also ways that you can do justice advocacy in your local community. So let's go through the PowerPoint. We should take about 25, 30 minutes, and then we'll engage one another. So write down any questions that you have, and we're engaged to the end. So let me share my screen. Let's see. All right, so can you, and I've got 2 screens going on, so I will need for you to, can you see my PowerPoint?
Yep.
Good, good, good. Let me make it a little bigger. Let's see. All right. So we are your office is a public witness and United Nations. So I'm sure all of you are familiar with the way the church is structured. So we have the office of the General Assembly on one side, and that's with the stated clerk, and they deal with all the ecclesial matters of the church. And then on this side, we have PMA that we're under, Presbyterian Mission Agency, and we're part of Compassion, Peace, and Justice, and there are 8 different components, and you're familiar with most of these: self-development of people, Presbyterian hunger, disaster assistance, the peacemaking program, the advisory committee on social witness policy. So in that first orange block you see the Office of Public Witness and the Presbyterian Ministry at the United Nations. So we have 2 offices, and they are, one's in DC, one's in New York. And so these are our staff. We have a total staff of 6. And again, we are excellent resources. I mean, I really can't say that enough. So if you want to have any conversation with any members of our staff, please feel free to send me an email, and I will direct you to those you need to talk to. So I serve as a director of both offices. In normal times, 50% of my time is spent in travel, where I'm traveling across the country, talking primarily to Presbyterians, talking to mid-councils, presbyteries, and senates, but also will be invited by congregations, but I really try to have it of a more holistic approach where I can talk to more people at one time. And I've gotten to the last year wherein I stay for more than 1 or 2 days, where I try to stay 3 or 4 days and go to different ends of the presbytery so that people won't have to travel as far. But I do presentations, as you see on the left, but also I've appeared before Congressional Committee. This was Education and Labor. We have a lot of engagement with members of Congress. A lot of committee work and ecumenical work is done by my colleagues, but I do more of the higher level stuff if we're meeting with an embassy head, or if we're meeting with a member of Congress directly, then I try to attend those meetings. So we have in DC, we have a staff of 3. On the left is Annette Greer, who is our office manager, who runs the office, maintains my travel. In the middle is Catherine Gordon. I'm sure some of you have met Catherine. Catherine does our international work. So any questions about what's going on in Ukraine, what's our policy on the Ukraine, what's going on in Yemen and Ethiopia, because we know there are 20 wars worldwide that we're struggling with. What's our policy on Israel-Palestine? And Catherine is our longest tenured staff, so she's been there the longest. So she knows all of our public policy and is really engaged internationally. And on the right, we have Christian Brooks. Christian is a graduate of Pittsburgh Theological Seminary. All of our staff are seminary graduates, which is very, it's a plus. And Christian does all of our domestic work. And primarily, a lot of our work is dictated by what's coming out of Congress and what the White House is dealing with. So we do a lot of advocacy towards members of Congress, trying to influence their vote a certain way. We have engagements with them, a lot of ecumenical work. So that's our DC office. And then in New York, we have Sue Ream on the left, who's our representative, and Ivy is a mission specialist. So she's part-time, but before the year is out, hopefully they both will be full-time members. And they work right across the street from the United Nations and the United Methodist Women building, and dealing with the UN and making sure that we have engagement with the UN. So this is their signature event, the UN Commission on the Status of Women. This year it was March the 14th to the 25th. It's 2 weeks, and women in the past have come to New York, but the last 2 years it's been online. And Presbyterians constitute a large proportion of the women who are gathered. And it talks about women empowerment around the globe, especially in areas like Afghanistan, which has a history of the suppression of the rights of women. So that's their signature event. And we haven't selected the dates for 2023 yet, but it's always in March, and it's for 2 weeks. This is a part of our ministry that we really want to highlight, is that we have young people who work with us. So again, any young people who are your grandchildren, children who are in school, who want credit for class. So we have different levels. One, we have fellows who work for the summer. They're paid summer interns for 2 months, June and July. And they write papers, they meet with committees, It's not grunt work. They do a lot of work that helps them to be informed and engaged in public policy. We also have YAVs, young adult volunteers, who are part of the YAV program out of Louisville, who stay with us for a year. We have seminarians that we give course credit for, field education credit for, and also adult volunteers. And in this virtual environment, is more, it used to be people had to live in DC or in the surrounding region to work with us, but now you can do it online. And also students can get extended course credit by working with us while in school. And so a lot of opportunities to engage with young people. So we do advocacy. We do advocacy, and it's justice advocacy. And I pulled this from Penn State, and I really like this statement that they have on their webpage, because I looked at a lot of different definitions of advocacy, and especially the things that you would think, talking about human rights, civil rights, social economic inequities, protection of social rights such as racial identity, dealing with issues of race and poverty. But also what I liked about Penn State's statement was the last word was spirituality. They acknowledge that advocacy is not just a secular pursuit, but it's a part of being a disciple. It's a part of your spiritual understanding in dealing with justice. And so we say advocacy simply is speaking up and standing with. We don't do it for people, we try to do it with people. And so we want to make sure that we engage in that order. I always want to talk about it from a biblical perspective, because we have to help people, especially those who are struggling with talking about justice issues in the life of the church, that it's biblical. It is biblical. So these are two Bibles that I highly recommend. The one on the left, the Brown Poverty and Justice Bible, it's a contemporary English version, 2009. It's basically just like the red letter version of the King James Bible, wherein all of the justice passages and verses are highlighted. So when you open it up, anything pertaining to justice is highlighted in this Bible. Now, the one on the right is a newer Bible, and we give this one to all of our young people who work with us as fellows or as YAVs. This is a study Bible, and the Scots Justice Bible. And so you know how you open up a study Bible, and it's a column down the middle of the page where the verse will be on the left, and then you have study questions or insight on the right. Where I really like this I like them both, love them both, scripture, but the God's Justice Bible is really one, I think, that is helpful for young adults to look at. So then I'm going to skip through a lot of this, but basically what I said, that we believe that the mandate that we have from Jesus to follow his model of ministry, preaching, teaching, and healing. And very quickly for a Bible study, I found this to be fascinating. Matthew condensed, he's the only one who uses Matthew 4:23 and Matthew 9:35. And he basically writes the same passage verbatim. And he says, Jesus went, the only difference is the location, all Galilee in the first, cities and villages in the second. But he lays out, Jesus was preaching, teaching, and healing. He got that from Mark, because we know that Mark was the first gospel written. So in Matthew and Luke use Mark as a prototype. He noticed that in Mark 1, Mark laid out this threefold ministry of Jesus, but he separated throughout that first chapter. 14 is 114 proclaiming or preaching, 121 teaching, 134 healing. So Matthew again condensed, he's the only one who does this, the ministry of Jesus. And as I said in my talk, this is what the church has done, followed the same model. And then again, one of the questions that's going to be asked, well, what did Jesus have to do with politics? You know, did Jesus address issues of politics? Jesus didn't go to Herod himself and have a conversation about laws or his policy. But we do know that Jesus talked about justice and was concerned especially with the poor. And many of his parables focus on injustice as directed towards the poor. And one of my favorite passages is Matthew 23:23, where he accused the Pharisees, as I noted in my talk, of neglecting the weightier matters, the more important matters of the law, justice, mercy, and faithfulness. And so John Calvin, we know John Calvin was very engaged civically. He talked about civil magistracy as a calling not only holy and legitimate, but the most sacred and honorable in human life. I think the call to ministry is the most honorable and sacred in human life. But I do think it's important for us to understand that he did not see this separation of church and state, that people of faith shouldn't be engaged in the governance of a city or engaged in influence the governance. So I'm going to skip that. So one of the ways that we do our work and a way that we can encourage you is through digital advocacy. Zoom has proven to be a godsend. I mean, and the churches have adapted so quickly to Zoom. So what it has done is giving you greater access to your national legislators. Now, we do advocacy on the national level. We don't do state advocacy or local advocacy. We do training workshops and things along that line. And so now you can set up a meeting with your member of Congress. And the first thing they're going to want to know is, are you a constituent? Do you represent my constituents? So you make sure you let them know, yes, I am your constituent. But you can set up meetings now. The other side is that it's rare nowadays that you get a direct conversation with your member of Congress. Now it's more so with the staff, but don't be dismayed because that's just as valid because they're the ones who inform the members of Congress. Facebook has a page on the left called Facebook Social Good where you can do fundraising for nonprofits, and 100% of that which is raised goes to the nonprofit. Emails make a difference, phone calls. So be engaged with digital advocacy and know that, and I really appreciate, I think Rex, you said this, you got to be in this thing for the long run. There's not going to be one conversation you have, one letter you write that's going to change a person's mind, but you really want to understand that to make legislative and policy changes, it does take time. But when they come, they are generally huge and life-changing. Healthcare. Since the days of the administration of Theodore Roosevelt, we've been talking about universal healthcare in this country. And it didn't come about, and almost every president has had it as his agenda to have universal healthcare. And that's regardless of whether they were Democrats or Republicans. Eisenhower, Truman, Nixon, all of them wanted to see some form of universal healthcare. But it took until the Obama administration, and right now, upwards of 30 additional Americans have health care coverage. So but know that your efforts are making a difference, but it's cumulative, wherein you're adding on to what's going on. And again, this raising of the living wage has been going on for decades, to fight for raising living wage. And we're now seeing the results of that as cities all across this country are increasing living wages and states are increasing living wages. This is the way we do our work. We have a web page that you can see on the PCUSA web page. An alert is a one-page statement that we write. I thought I had an example of it. And if you're on our distribution email list, you can get a one-page statement asking for you to contact your member of Congress. And all you have to do is click on the link at the bottom. It'll take you directly to their email, and you can either send the statement that we have written, or you can write your own statement. But it's an alert, usually asking you to contact your member of Congress. We do webinars. We average one a month. We try to go back and forth, international and domestic. And again, if you send to Laura or to Rachel your email and they send it on to me, I can put you on our email distribution list and you can receive our information. We have a Facebook. Most of our social media hits on Facebook, Twitter account. We have a blog that we update. We have a newsletter that we do called Washington Report that we issue out at least between 3 and 4 times a year. We write articles and you get access to all of this. And these are things that you can do. Your Presbytery has a wonderful webpage talking about just different issues of justice. And it sends out statements and things along this line. This is a follow-up on the Commission for the Status of Women. I've already talked about that. Our signature event in DC that we just had last week is called Ecumenical Advocacy Days. In the past, it was in person. The last 2 years, it has been online. It was the 24th through the 26th. It was the 25th through the 27th this past year. And also, we do Training Day. Training Day is only for Presbyterians. So we do that first, and then we follow that up with Ecumenical Advocacy Days. And again, it's workshops, it's plenaries, conversations with one another about things that are being done in your state. And Presbyterians always constitute the largest majority. This is an example of an action alert, a one-page statement. The one on the left is international, the one on the right is domestic. We make statements, issue statements from our office, and our office, the UN office, the Washington office, and the stated clerk can speak on behalf of the denomination. So when we issue statements, I can say whether it's on behalf of the Office of Public Witness, the UN office, or on behalf of the Presbyterian Church. None of the other program agencies can make that type of a statement on behalf of the entire denomination. They can make statements on behalf of their program ministry area, but not the denomination. And we do not determine the social witness policy of the denomination. We reflect it. So anything that the GA, the state clerk, has spoken on, we can speak to. But if they have not, if we don't have public policy on it, we cannot advocate for or against it. This is an example of a sign-on letter that we sign on to all of the time. And a lot of those are with our coalition partners. And then also meet with members of Congress. Before the pandemic struck, we were having a lot of engagement with members of Congress. I came to the office from North Carolina, so I knew all of the North Carolina members of Congress, David Price, Butterfield. I didn't know Burr. And Burr's an interesting person. He grew up Presbyterian. He now says he's United Methodist, but his father was a Presbyterian minister, Richard Burr. But most of them I had some personal connection with, so it was easy for me to have conversations with them. And then we know Chris Coons, who's a Presbyterian elder. He went to seminary at Yale. Is very religious, very faithful, very engaged with the church, and just a good guy. He's the two senators from Delaware are both Presbyterian. We have 24 Presbyterians in Congress, 12 in the House, 12 in the Senate. I think 6 of them are Democrats and the rest are Republicans. Example of a webinar that we did when COVID first hit, talking about COVID at the margins, how it impacted marginalized communities, the Asian American community, the African American community, the LGBTQIA+ community. We also, this is really one, I think, of the best parts of the work that we do. It's the joint work that we do with our other coalition partners. And this is something I strongly stress in your local community. Oftentimes when we look for colleagues, we look for other Presbyterians. But I encourage you to look at the ecumenical community, what are other churches doing, especially in your immediate neighborhood, how you can partner together. Because oftentimes you're having the same conversations separately, where they're concerned with hunger and poverty in your local community, and you're concerned with it. And oftentimes we do our ministries separately, but we really need to look at a model, an ecumenical and an interfaith model, and also look at nonprofits, what they are doing. Nonprofits are really the experts in all of these issues. For example, voting rights. If you want to, I encourage people to talk to the ACLU. They have so many resources. They keep catalogs of what voting right laws are being passed positively and negatively in states, and say that these are the ones you need to oppose, these are ones that we need to affirm. But our ecumenical and interfaith community in DC is called the Washington Interreligious Staff Community, WISC. And we have the worst acronyms in DC, but there are 70 of us. We meet once a month on the 3rd Friday. And we talk about ways that we can work together. Again, we have joint, I would dare say that half of our work in DC is done in this community. I'm serving as one of the chairs this year and next year, and it's really an empowering, wonderful experience. Because you know, clergy, you know that we don't always work well together. We don't always, sit at the ecumenical table. Now, if we're in charge, we might come to the meeting, but it's a really wonderful community. And then we take the heads of these communities. Now, I told you we have the worst acronyms. This group is called HOWO, the heads of Washington office. And we're the heads of the different offices, and we meet once a month as well to talk about ways that we can collaborate together. We're a good partner to the Poor People's Campaign. When you look at the work that they're doing, we know the Reverend Dr. William Barber is the Disciples of Christ minister, and the Reverend Dr. Leah Steele Harris is the Presbyterian minister. The Poor People's Campaign is in New York, the state of New York, and it's in 43 states across the nation. And they basically focus on legislation, dealing with healthcare, dealing with a living wage, dealing with issues of justice, trying to influence what's going on. So this is a wonderful resource that the denomination offers. I'm sure most of you are familiar with the policy papers and documents that the denomination puts out. So if you type in PCUSA, social witness policy statements, these will pop up. Now they won't pop up like this because I took a screenshot of my computer, but you will see under different topics like racial justice, you'll see the documents. Under economics, living wage, you'll see the documents. Human rights, you'll see the documents. So if you look on the left, the one with the flag, honest patriotism, and the one that says religious freedom, those are the newest two that we have done, and they're done by the Advisory Committee for Social Witness Policy, and they write these statements on behalf of the church. And then you look in the middle, the one with the guns is one that's very popular, deals with gun violence. The red one, we shall not be moved, and the one with the other flag deal with voting rights. The ones on the third line deal with immigrant issues. So these are documents that you can download for free in your congregations or individually and see the positions of the church, and they have guidance and rationales and really wonderful documents that are underutilized by our congregations. You know about our communications department. We have, and if you have not signed up to get our daily briefings, I really would encourage you. They come every other day, if not sometimes every day. And they're news briefings, not just on the work of the national church, but on things that are going on throughout the denomination. And then you're aware about Presbyterians Today and the Outlook, which are hard copies of our magazines. But you also, don't tell them, they ask you to get subscriptions, which are pretty inexpensive. But they also, you can read most of the articles online, but I didn't tell you that. But so you have access to them online for free. And Unbound on the bottom left is our social justice. It's only online, not a hard copy, dealing with issues of justice that Presbyterians are engaged in. Obviously, Matthew 25, building congregational vitality, dismantling structural racism, and eradicating systemic poverty. We're encouraging mid-councils, senates, and presbyteries, congregations to sign on to be Matthew 25. And you don't have to do anything new in the life of your church. If you are doing, have any ministry that's dealing with issues of race, conversations, conferences, you already are a Matthew 25. Every church is building congregational vitality. You know, that's a very broad ask. And so we do ask for churches to move in this direction, to define themselves as Matthew 25. And we have gone beyond these three now. We also are adding on militarism and environmental justice as well, and dealing with climate change. This is a resource, racial justice resources, and you see that blue box on the left. Those are the categories where you have resources up under them. I just have the top half of the page, but Black Lives Matter, statements from the PCUSA, worship resources, policy statements, recommended books, study training and discussion materials, and articles. So this is online now on the PCUSA webpage. And if you type in racial justice resources, it'll take you to that page. And then this is one on gun violence policies, studies, and resources, which also has categories that you can download resources to talk about gun violence, which is really one of the major issues in our country. We've got to get a grip on the violence, the epidemic that is plaguing this country, and especially for our young people. Our young people are being traumatized by gun violence. These are some secular resources that I utilize. The Heal and Roll Call you can get hard copies of them, but you also can sign up for their electronic letters. I really would encourage either one. I like Roll Call. I really utilize Roll Call a lot. But the moment something happens in the White House, the moment something happens on Congress or with the State Department, 10 to 15, 20 minutes later, you get an article. They're pretty objective. They don't take a slant left or right. You basically get the facts on what has happened. Now, the Washington Post has what's called the Washington Post Live, where they're not doing as many as they used to, but they almost each day they will have a 30-minute interview with someone talking about different issues. But you can sign up for those whether you have a subscription to the Post or not. All right. So I'm going to stop that. All right. So this is always, for me, the best part of these conversations I want to hear, what are you doing in your congregations? What's happening in the presbytery that excites you? And what are some ways that the office can be a resource for you? Because our goal is not to have you to support us, but that we support you in your work, because this is part of the reality. We talk about, people oftentimes will ask me, what should we prioritize? And I really say, I turn the question back and say, what are the issues in your local community? And first of all, and then secondly, what's your passion? What keeps you up at night? What really are the justice issues that motivate you? Because that's going to help to sustain you. Because when you deal with our office on the national level, it's slow. It's painfully slow. And Congress, I would dare say, is probably the most dysfunctional I think it's ever been in American history. It's always been, you had this partisanship, but right now there's a different attitude in the minds of people who are elected to Congress, and that's dysfunction. And not everyone. I think most men and women who are elected to Congress want to pass legislation, but it's gotten to the point now where the naysayers have the dominant voices, and everything is partisan. Even things like the budget that they know they've got to do everything. And so we're at a point now we're in, if you want to engage nationally, you've got to be engaged in the long haul. So I tell individuals, I say, you can get more accomplished in your local community and in your state. Now, of course, it depends on who's elected to your state. You might be reflecting the same issues that we have in Congress, but you have more access. You know who your city council members are. You can, and sometimes they're members of your church. You see them every Sunday. You know who your mayor is, and oftentimes they will respond to your emails. And then on the state level, they also, I think, are more responsive. So, but this is not to deter anyone from wanting to do national advocacy. But I do encourage you to look, one, at what's going on in your local community, because that's going to be easier to galvanize people around. And also, I say, don't try to do too much. Really be very realistic in your advocacy goals, because it does take time and you want to engage with people. So Rachel, since you are here with us, you never get a moment off.
I see Rex has his hand up, so we'll start with Rex.
Okay.
Thanks again, Jimmie. I've been involved with faith-based community organizing in Niagara County. And I know that in Washington, D.C., there's the Washington Interfaith Network, I think it's called. And in Buffalo, there's, what is it? Voice Buffalo.
Okay.
And I really encourage pastors and congregations to be involved in such social justice advocacy work with other denominations in faith-based community organizing, because you do tackle local issues, strategic long haul things, but also the short-term victories that are needed to keep people engaged. So I don't know if you ever knew Jeff Craybill, who was active in Washington, D.C., but he wrote a book about faith-based community organizing, and unfortunately he died of cancer a couple of years ago, but I would recommend that book. I have it in my library somewhere, but I won't be able to find it right away. So anyway.
Yeah, thanks for sharing it, because Jeff died right when I was coming to DC. So I know his sister really well, Susan, but unfortunately didn't get a chance to meet Jeff. But you're absolutely right. Partnerships with your local community. I mean, I do think the church, we don't do enough of that ecumenical and interfaith, and we say, you have 5 members in your church who are interested in social justice advocacy. They have 7 members over here in another church, and you have 10 over here and 2 over here. Together, that's a sizable group, when you talk about it. So I encourage people not to try to do it in isolation.
Thank you, Rex. What I'll do is call on you, and you can kind of answer what Jimmie shared, what you're doing, what your church is doing. You can ask a question, or you can simply say, pass. So I will start it off with Linda.
Well, we're kind of in a strange time in the life of our congregation, because we were looking for a pastor about the time the pandemic hit, and we had an unfortunate transitional person who I won't even refer to as leader. And so now, instead of trying to just onboard a new pastor who moved from the South with his wife and two very small children. But we had 3 staff members not scheduled to leave, but for different reasons left. And so we're trying to onboard a new person to an entire church system who didn't even come from a 501c3 background and is Catholic. So no understanding of our polity or system. And moving your family from a different climate when they're 2 and 5 during a pandemic and introducing them to new schools and everything is tough. But when you're
And I think it was February.
Yeah, in February, thank you. It was in February, it was in the wintertime. And he's a Black pastor with his wife is Kenyan and she is a pastor into a 97 or 8% white community. I gotta say, of all the boxes a church could check, it's probably one of the most difficult. And it's not difficult necessarily for us. It is ridiculously difficult for Pastor Hughes. Just this last week, he was in conversation with the program staff. We encouraged him to talk to clergy, the clergy retreat coming up the next couple of days. He was having discourse with someone who was an elder, once an elder, always an elder, who rolled off the board of deacons. Thank you very much, because otherwise we may have to have done something a little stronger. But there's discourse. We encouraged a direct conversation. Direct conversation couldn't happen, so it was a phone call. He thought things were kind of getting in a place where maybe there was an understanding of his life as a Black man in America was vastly different than this white guy's life in America. And then something hit his personal Facebook wall that the pastor couldn't see, that some of us who knew this was going on could see. And so as a member of the anti-racism task group, I have a strong inclination to do something or say something. I want to make sure that I insulate my colleague from further harm. I shoot from the hip. Most people on this call know if I got something on my mind, everyone's going to know about it. I'm worship assistant tomorrow. I hope he's in church, because directly after church, I will be telling him how disgusted, dismayed, and disappointed about something I saw on his Facebook wall that was dismissive, disrespectful, and horrifying, given who our new pastor is. And so listening to you today, it's about advocacy, speaking up and standing with, coming alongside. And I don't have to go to Buffalo to do that. I'm called to do it right now, right in my own backyard. So I appreciate all the work. I knew Catherine Gordon from when she first started, because I'm a founding member of the Israel-Palestine Mission Network. This is interesting work. So I thank you for what you do. And if you come here to see the falls, make sure you look me up, because Josh Allen built a house 6 houses from me.
Oh, okay. Well, we might have to go by his house and get lost.
Maybe he can. Maybe we can get the Buffalo Bills to do some advocacy work.
Oh, that would be great. And that's really, I think, very seriously, look at some of the celebrities in your community. Because many of them are people of faith. Peyton Manning is a Presbyterian. But also, I do think that it's a part of one of our strategies definitely needs to be, and again, utilizing the language that's on your webpage, how to have those dangerous dialogues, and then talk more about how do we have conversations that are difficult, and how do we talk about issues of disagreement or controversy. And one of the things that I like to talk about first and foremost is to focus not so much on our differences, but the fact of what we have in common. We all are people of faith, and we all are here for the same reason. And a major mistake that Christians are making in this country today is where their political affiliation is stronger than their spiritual affiliation. That we get so upset over politics. I mean, and as soon as someone disagrees with us politically, we get emotional energy engaged in. And so we've got to help people to understand that as Christians, we can talk about anything. We can talk about anything because the bond that we have in Christ Jesus is greater than anything that this world will use to keep us apart, and to help people to understand that we are Christians first before we are anything else. That when we say we follow Jesus Christ, that we mean that we're following him to the end. And so every other alliance that we have is subservient to our following Christ. And therefore, we can have conversations about healthcare, and you and I can be on different sides of it, but we understand that we're at this table for a purpose. We're to learn from one another. We want to hear one another out. We want to engage with one another in a helpful conversation because, for example, the issue of poverty. I don't think I've ever met a Christian who does not disagree that poverty is an issue. The problem comes in when we start talking about strategies, whether we're going to get people to work or whether we're going to have entitlements for folk. And so we've got to find a middle ground somewhere. And that's the problem in Congress right now, where people are not really willing to compromise with each other, have these conversations. So in the church, I encourage congregations to understand that we're all here for the same purpose, to follow Jesus Christ. We are faithful. We want to be faithful to God. And that sometimes it means that we are going to pursue a different strategy in our political alliances, but that ultimately we have the same goal. We want to see that people have whole lives. As a Christian, we do want people to have their needs met. But again, we've got to find ways and I think the session can offer some leadership here and say, we're going to have some training for our congregation on how to have difficult conversations and sit down together. We're not going to present any issues, but we're just going to talk about how we set ground rules for each other as Presbyterians and as Christians.
Thank you. I haven't seen any hands go up, so I'll continue to call on you. And then, of course, if you want to pass, you can.
I've got my hand up, Rachel. Well, that's
oh,
right.
you
I'm
do,
high.
Kevin.
See?
I'm so sorry. I
found
didn't
the
see
button
that.
and everything. Thank
Thank
you.
you.
Yeah. So Jimmie, thanks so much for your gifts today. And you just when I put my hand up, 2 seconds later said exactly where my mind was. And that is that the political part of the discussion ought to be the how. It should not be is this the truth or is this not the truth? And I think we're in a situation where, politically speaking, both political parties, because I wish there were three, but there really are only two, are in a position where neither is willing to say that the emperor has no clothes. And what should really happen, whether it's about climate change or healthcare or poverty or social justice or whatever, in order to actually begin to build a strategy on how to approach it, you have to acknowledge that it actually is an issue. And that's what's happened, in my view, of the political arena, is that it has devolved to the point where people are not even willing to acknowledge its existence, and that in and of itself avoids the discussion and the negotiation, which is what it ought to be, of how to actually address these things. And that's just my observation. The other thing, just to kind of dovetail on what you started with during your initial talk, is, when you mentioned the marches that you were observing and involved in, where the average age was probably under 30, a lot of the change that we need is generational, and people that look like me, both white and white hair, we're that generation that, there's a lot of folks, a lot of the change is generational. And since people that look like me are the heads of most of our churches, or involved in leadership in most of our churches, it's more difficult to have churches catch up with where they ought to be and drive change. So I absolutely, acknowledge that. That's the difficult part. And like Linda, my congregation is 98% white. So it makes doing something about being active in social justice a little bit more of a challenge. But I think, as I said, we're having weekly anti-racism seminars and whatnot at the church, and we're really putting a focus on it. And I feel really good about where we are. But as I said, I think that it's a large challenge for most churches.
Thank you for sharing it. And I wholeheartedly agree. There are two things I would really kind of comment on. And I really like the acknowledgement of the Presbyterian Church is 90% white and mostly Republican. Most of our members are Republican. Now, the leadership of the church is more diverse as far as clergy and mostly Democrat, which is an interesting dynamic that you have with our clergy. But I also will say, I see evidence of how the Spirit is moving racially in this church. Because, in our past, the Presbyterian Church really kind of, for a lot of social justice issues, played it safe. We really didn't want, during the abolitionist period, we didn't want to appear to be too radical, but we had a lot of individual clergy who were abolitionists and very engaged. And especially one of the things that I'm really proud of is that the contribution of the Presbyterian Church to the abolitionist movement was in the education of Black clergy. When you read a history book and you see the prominent names of Black abolitionists, most of them were Presbyterian and trained by the Presbyterian Church. Henry Highland Garner, J.W.C. Pennington, Samuel Cornish, all of these guys. So the church made a contribution to the social justice movement, even though it itself said, well, we don't really want to deal with it, because it's so controversial, especially in the South, and would have caused a lot of churches to leave. But and look at today now, even though the church is 90% white, when you look at the leadership, our stated clerk is African-American, the head of PMA is African-American, I'm African-American. Most of the upper echelon of our leadership is of color. And so that's the movement of the Spirit, I think, in the church, where the church is saying, we acknowledge that we do need to have more diversity. Of course, back in, we said by 2010, we wanted a higher percentage of the church to be non-white. We didn't meet that goal, but I think we are moving in a direction where we are being led by the Spirit. And I'll close and say this. With the fact that most of our congregations are rather moderate or conservative, look at how the Spirit moves at General Assembly. It's amazing. Well, we send everyday Presbyterians to General Assembly, and they come out with the most progressive statements and these most progressive overtures that really is, I think, how the Spirit, and it's not contentious. We don't have these big drawn-out fights where people say, well, you did this except for, the ordination of gays and lesbians. That really costs, I think, some of the more conservative churches and clergy to leave. But I do think that we're at a different place in our history. So I'm very encouraged. We do need to diversify in the everyday pews because, the country is becoming more of color. And so if we want to have a vibrant church that's engaged, we've got to have more diversity. But that does begin with leadership. And I'm encouraged that you have a Black pastor who's over a white congregation, because more Black people of color in the community are going to notice that and see that as a positive sign.
Pat.
Hi, Reverend Hawkins. I was so inspired to hear you in the first hour and now to continue in the second hour. I'm a fellow Southerner, and I'm not clergy. I've been a member of my church for almost 40 years here in Buffalo or Clarence. And I'm on my second tour of duty as the admin, but I've also been clerk of session and been on deacons. And so all that is to say, I like to be involved. And I'm in the anti-racism task group, but I joined just for personal reasons. Being a Southerner, I just felt it was my responsibility to learn, what is the backstory here that I missed. And so it has been a journey. It's, you know, I've had so many different feelings. Mainly, the biggest one is how could we all be duped our whole lives thinking one thing and finding out it's completely different. I remember in Savannah, you know, seeing the white only, colored only water fountains. So I know it existed. I lived in it. So I would say that, yes, we are, my church also is predominantly white, as is the community. But I think that gives us even greater responsibility to be, I think the term now is an ally in this, trying to right all these wrongs. And I think it's our responsibility as Christians to learn about it and keep moving that ball forward instead of letting somebody dig a hole and bury that ball. And I think it takes all generations. So it was really good to hear from you. And I wrote down all the different resources, and I'll check those out later. So thank you very much for joining us today. That's the great thing about Zoom.
It is. And I agree wholeheartedly with you. I came in January of 2017. In the first conference that I was invited to speak, it was a church in Virginia. And they invited me for a conversation about racism. And it was a month-long conversation where in each Sunday they had a different person come in from different perspectives, African-American, Hispanic. And I still remember the Christian educator who's a friend of mine. He said to me, you know, we're kind of a little nervous. This is the first time we've ever had this type of a conversation in our congregation. And I talked with him afterwards, and he said it just went over wonderfully well. But Presbyterians are talking about race all across the country. I mean, everywhere I go, you see Black Lives Matter signs on the congregation, and it's not always received well, you know, once the session decides to do that. But they're talking about white privilege, and there's an ongoing debate of having an engagement within white communities about what does it mean to be white in America, you know, and what does it mean to be an ally, and how do we really produce change? And I think people are really trying to challenge themselves to continue to grow and learn. But again, oftentimes the voices that get the most attention are the ones, the negative voices, you know. And you often just have one or two, but they're strong voices in the congregation and they're pretty consistent. But I do think that the Spirit is doing a new thing in this whole country, and not just the Presbyterian Church, but other denominations as well are having these same type of conversations. And so one of the things I do say, we've got to deal with the issue of race, but we also got to deal with the issue of poverty in this country, which I think it transcends every other issue, that every racial demographic is dealing with the issue of poverty.
Just to point out, you've got 1.5 minutes left.
Oh, Lord. Okay. I'll stop talking in the call. We have a couple other hands up.
Thomas?
Yeah, okay, so then very quickly, first of all, it was a very good news to hear. I don't have to stand anymore by myself when somebody asking in the group which seminary you belonged and when, because now I have a seminary colleagues in the new presbytery, the Kenyan lady, who finished her seminary in Budapest in the theological university and ordained to the pastor into my mother church. And she speaks very good Hungarian, and she was so happy to find somebody who she can talk Hungarian. So how small is the world? Very quickly, you mentioned the pandemic. There was another element of the pandemic. Our congregation here in Silver Creek basically did mission because we are Presbyterian and we're doing mission. When the pandemic started, the question come up, do we really need to go overseas? Why don't we look around our own community what we can do.
Mhm.
And the initial reaction was on that. There are government agencies, everybody taking care of it. And when we've decided no, this congregation started to look into what to do with local communities.
Mhm. Okay.
Yeah.
Thank you. Thanks for sharing that.
Thank you. We are going to end up going back into the main room. And if there is time, Cynthia, we can also hear from you and maybe some concluding thoughts from Reverend Hawkins.
Okay.
If you'll just click on leave room and we'll see you back.
This meeting is being recorded.
Hello, everyone. Welcome back to the main room. We are just coming back from our breakout rooms. We're with Jimmie Hawkins in his room, and we're waiting to hear from one more person before we finish the meeting, and then concluding thoughts from Jimmie. And then I invite everyone to continue to stay on for our brief 15-minute Presbytery meeting. This is very important, from noon to noon 15, to handle 2 motions brought before us. It could be shorter than that, but it is work that we need to do. So Cynthia, would you like to share?
I'm going to share simply because what I wanted to mention is that Reverend Hawkins has written a book, and it is, I think, a very exciting, of course, I don't have the title exactly, but it is a history, and please correct me, Jimmie, if this doesn't describe it well, but a history of Black resistance from the beginning and before American history. Our colonial, founding of the country. So I recommend it highly as a source to, again, better understand the fullness of American history. But Jimmie, if you could give the exact title, because I don't have it in front of me.
Now, I just want everyone to know that Cynthia is not a plant, that I sent her a text asking her to bring it up. But yeah, it's called Unbroken and Unbowed. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to put the link in the web page. But thanks for bringing it up. It's a history of Black protest in the United States, and it's published by our own Westminster John Knox Press. And so I'm going to paste that right now. And so you can, and I would, I do book signings and Zoom, but not necessarily book signings, but webinars on talking about the book. And it goes through from the 1400s, the landing of Columbus, up until the Black Lives Matter movement and the murder of George Floyd, so up to 2020. And just talk about the ways in which Black people have responded to oppression in this country during slavery, during Jim Crow, and how it was deemed as a part of our being patriots, because the heart of Black protest has never been to destroy the country or to do away with the system, but to have it to be a more perfect union, to say live up to the creeds and values that we express, and for America to, as Langston Hughes said, for America to be America. And so that was a very inspirational moment for me, because I really, each period in history, there's been a different wave of Black protest. And one of the things that again, is inspiration to me is that it's been to make the country a better place for all people. And to say that, these policies, this legislation, Jim Crow, all of this is unjust and contrary to the American form of democracy. And one thing I will say, that the Revolutionary War, we had periods in our history when we had opportunities to really move forward, but we missed it. Right after the Revolutionary War, that's when you saw all of the northern states start to abolish slavery. And there was a real conversation in the country about, what's the status of slavery? How can we say that we are a democratic republic when we fought to free ourselves from British tyranny, and then we hold people in bondage? And there was a real movement. And I think George Washington was being pushed to talk more against slavery and to free his slaves, but he just couldn't bring himself to that point. But then after, obviously, the Civil War and Reconstruction, where for 10 years, you saw some of the most progressive legislation. But then as soon as the Union troops were taken out of the South, And of course, we go right back to business as usual. And so I think that we've had periods wherein we have had opportunities to move forward, but I always acknowledge things are a lot better now than they ever have been, but we still have work to do. So again, that link is in the in the chat, and you can get a look at it for John Knox Press, but also it's at Barnes and Nobles and on Amazon as well. And I tell you this, Amazon has a cheaper price than the $30 that's recommended. And I did a little research on that, and what they do is if the book is selling, then they will reduce their price. So that's actually kind of a good sign for me that the book seems to be selling.
There's also, Jimmie, there's also a bookshop. It's called Bookshop. It's online as well. And they actually give money to libraries and other entities as you pay for Jimmie's book. But they also have lots of other books, just not Jimmie's book, but it's called bookshop.org, I believe. It's a great place. You should look that up because they give to a lot of different, as part of what you give, they give back. And Jimmie's book is there. And yes, it is a little more expensive than Amazon, but if you're thinking you would like to be thoughtful about where you buy books, not saying that Amazon's bad, but being thoughtful about where you buy books, the bookshop might be it.
And just a little follow-up on that, Laura. Thanks for sharing that, because I was not aware of that. But anyone here work for Amazon? Amazon does, there's some of their policies, you know, they prohibit libraries from getting copies of their books if there's online. So they have some things that I do not like that they do. So I will say go to Bookshop or go to Westminster John Knox Press. Well,
thank you. Thank you. Thank you so much, Jimmie. And we want you to know that we support you, the work that you're doing, your team, the Presbyterian Church USA. We are so thankful for the resources, for the daily grind. We know that it's a slow roll. As I like to say, we'll have change in about 15, 20 years. We'll get there. The hope is always that the change starts with each and every one of us. And by showing up today, each and every one of you has taken one step closer to becoming an ally in this journey, and however that looks for you in your ministry, in your calling, in your conscience, in your church community, your home. But let me pray for Jimmie and the work that they're doing, and then you are certainly dismissed, Jimmie, as we have our business meeting for about 15 minutes. So everybody, please stick around. Let us pray. Lord God, we lift up Reverend Hawkins to you and the work that the Presbyterian Church USA is doing, that we are a part of. And they are boots on the ground in DC, in New York, Lord, and may we come alongside and be allies to that work in the way in which you call each and every one of us and our churches and our presbytery and our community and our hearts, Lord. Speak vision, speak wisdom, speak strength to us, Lord, not to be held back or to be silenced by our own fear or our own feeling of inadequacy, Lord, but that you give us courage and strength to take that step forward in the journey. Bless Jimmie Hawkins and his ministry, strengthen him and renew him, we pray. And Lord, bless this time that we have together as we do your work and your will in this presbytery meeting. In Jesus' name, amen.